So we were really sort of talking about like what, besides the youth thing, you know, all these different aspects, what are the you know, the capacities, and what do you think makes you such a good leader? So we got to hear from Councillor Joseph, and we got to hear from Councillor Fillmore. Mayor Minions has actually had to step away for an emergency, as these things happen, in that mayor position. And so we, and as a mom, so we will miss her during this part of the conversation. But Gavin, wondering if you have some insight from some of the research you've done on what are those sort of qualities that really make good leadership?
Yeah, I think that, you know, there's a research base we've done, and certainly there, what I've seen in terms of what folks are looking for from young leaders is a level of experience and a level of connectivity to the community. But what I would say, from having worked with a lot of elected officials, both supporting and campaigning for them, and also working with them in my role in business, is the thing that really makes effective leaders, especially in elected office, stand out is empathy. And it's continuing that empathy even in the face of difficult conversations. So, you know, when you're an elected official, the slings and arrows are thrown at you, and you're going to be attacked. It's going to happen. Being able to become resilient, develop a thickness of skin, but also to be empathetic as to the perspectives of all of the people that you're dealing with is really important. One of the reasons why we're very deliberately nonpartisan in the approach that we take to trying to support and engage young elected officials is that, frankly, many of the issues we face, especially municipally, are more generational than ideological. So if I can make sure that there's a green councillor and maybe a business-oriented councillor, or whoever, who know each other, who are talking, who recognize and empathize with one another, I think that's really, really important. I think it's critical that you're able to understand what your perspective is. And certainly if you're operating within a partisan perspective, to understand what your party's position is, but to be able to just have organic, real, authentic relationships with people that may disagree with you, and to know the difference between task conflict and personal conflict, I think is incredibly important. And it's a skill that I see in some of the most effective elected officials that I know.
Thanks, Gavin. So I'd like to go back into the councillors and sort of ask around, what are one or two things that really was that game changer for you that allowed you to run and you to successfully lead as you do? Because I'd love to get into how, as a community, what are those couple capacities, the empathy, thank you, Gavin, like how can we as a community foster opportunities for youth, some youth that don't have the same opportunities to build capacity or have the access to deep networks throughout community? What can we do to help support them to build those connections, to build that kind of experience, to build that sort of connection, if it's to the business world, to the social side? What can we do as a community?
Erilyn, you want to take that one first, or?
Sure. I think in my experience, I think mentorships really is a game changer in my experience, having exited post-secondary school and then was on the horizon to enter law school. I had 1 year there where I had an internship with the government of BC and the First Nations Summit, and that was critical in the context of gaining real world experience and building a skill set and being attached to somebody, whether it be a political leader or a policy writer or a researcher or an ADM or whatever of that nature, where you can feel where you want to go, and you really nurture that passion within oneself, and at that time it was myself, to hone that that desire to get into public service and be in that action where decisions are made and paths are forged to change the life of our young people, our elders, and the middle class as well, and the generations yet unborn. So I think mentorship was a real game changer, that even as a BCFN youth representative working at the BCFN here in Vancouver and the National Assembly of First Nations Youth Council, that was critical, and had immense amount of support from my colleagues there to really bring me under their wing and say, this is how we've been doing it, and find out where you fit within that. I think that was a game changer. And having goals. I think in high school, in my experience, it's always been, you got to be a positive contributor to society, and you have to figure out what you want to do with your life. Well, that's essentially what I took away from high school. And I was one of the ones who had some goals, and just like a lot of other young people, including myself. So I think mentorships was really key, and everything just takes off from there. And we need to anchor with those people who are in their career to be able to be mentored and gain that experience and other skill sets we might not have. So to ensure that succession and that continuity.
Yeah, I have to agree with Councillor Joseph on that one. It's not just setting goals, but being able to have that mentorship. That was huge for me, was being able to reach out to current sitting councillors at that time and past, and be able to see what's going to make this work for me and what's not going to make this work for me. But I also think, one of the things, if we start looking at how can we clear the path for more younger people to come in, what I look at it now is I look at the young people that currently sit in office. It's their job to make their path pave that path. When I look back at the 2018 municipal election, so the last municipal election that we had, on the island alone, there was lots of young people that ran that were successful in getting elected. There was Ned Taylor in Saanich. I believe he was 19, got elected. Myself at 20, Tofino also had a very young female get elected, and I believe Saanich also had another one. And then I believe the city of Victoria as well was successful in that. Once a young person runs in a difficult area. For myself, Qualicum Beach, we're an old community, and when I say old, it's off of population, where our average age bounces between 65 and 67. So having a 20-year-old represent a majority of 65-year-olds is very odd. But when you if you get elected in that type of setting, it allows other younger people to see and go, it's possible. And that's what I mean when you say we got to pave that path. Now I'm 22. At the end of my term, I'll be going on 24. Do I want to run again? Do I not want to run again? Do I do another term? Do I not? Do I find another young person to take my chair and have that succession so I can move on and keep that young voice at the table? That's the discussion I'm having now, and being able to just keep that ball rolling and making sure that support system is there. If I leave, is my support system still going to support that next young person? And that's what I'm working on now.
Thanks. A question we had earlier that is really kind of the flip side of this. What about the political system? What do you feel should change in the political system that would encourage more youth to run for office?
Maybe I can jump on this. Oh, sorry, Erin, did you want to go?
No, Gavin, you go right ahead.
You know what? Here's how we get more young people to run. Elect more young people. Because the fact of the matter is, when young people can see themselves reflected in a city council, or when they can see themselves reflected in a political party, or they can see someone who is within reach of who they are or who they aspire to be, that is the thing that is going to make it likely that they are going to step up and run. I used to run mentorship programs for university students. And one of the key things that I learned is that you don't inspire a university student by putting a 65-year-old CEO in front of them, because it's really vague and broad and very, very far out of reach. You inspire a 22-year-old university student by putting a really interesting, compelling 35-year-old middle manager in front of them, because that's an aspiration they can realistically see for themselves. So it's really important that councillors or that aspiring politicians are able to see on their city council, someone like Robert, who presents a realistic role model of, hey, I can do that. This is not a 20-year-old running for premier, but this is someone stepping up and running. And unless it's something we don't know, Robert, but this is somebody, stepping up and running, and I can see that, I can relate to that. So it's really important that whether it be councils who are renewing themselves on a nonpartisan basis, whether it be political parties that are renewing themselves on a generational basis, I think it's really, really important that people can see themselves reflected, whether that's in terms of gender, whether that's in terms of ethnicity, whether that's in terms of sexuality, or indeed whether that's in terms of gender. And the fact of the matter is, you shouldn't expect, if you're a political party or if you're a councillor or if you're a movement, you shouldn't expect people to vote for you if they can't see themselves reflected in you.
I
So
think
a question we're having from the audience is, what doors have opened for you that you weren't aware would open? And on the flip side, have any doors been closed that you hadn't really realized would be closed?
Yeah, so my perspective would have been to your previous answers, that we redefine what the process for nominating a person to represent their party in that riding. We often see a lot of candidates who have been in the role for quite some time, and it's hard, it's challenging to bump up against that for like Katie O'Connor or, you know, Bowen Ma, she made it in. And, you know, those are the factors that are weighed in a decision for a candidate to represent a party. Whereas a young person who may not have been established or curriculum vitae or a resume that is as well established as a person who's been in that role for a few years or more than a decade. So redefining what the qualifications are for a candidate to be a candidate and then electing that person. I think it may have been in Carol James' riding where her, the lady, I forget her name, who just got elected there. Yeah, the news was saying she may not be well known, but she got the vote. And so it just becomes the confidence of the political leader, whether that be Andrew Wilkinson or his successor, Premier Horgan or Mrs. Firstino, believing in the young people to hold that role and carry the platform forward.
what about lowering the voting age as well?
You know, it's funny. That's a good question. I'll touch on that one because it's something I feel very important on. But when we do talk about doors that have opened, doors closed, myself personally, I think doors have opened in my current job outside of the council chambers, as I do hold a full-time job. And when I look at doors, you know, my upper management has started to look at supervisor and management positions to say, you know, when you're a counselor, you're working with people, but you're also working with your staff. You're collaborating with council members. You're collaborating with the mayor. And that, when you're looking at all those different aspects, it is parts of the role. Doors that closed, sometimes when you go to apply to a new job and they see it on your resume, they go, what is this? And they can type your name into the Google search bar and whatever comes up, comes up. So I've also seen that as a deterrent, because you never know what's out there on you. I don't dare Google my own name because that's, you never know what's going to come up. When you look at lowering the voting age, you know, it can be a plus. But one thing that I hear a lot is people say, I wouldn't trust myself as a 16-year-old voting. Myself, would I trust myself at 16 voting? Maybe at the municipal level, yes. Provincial and federal, not really, because have you really dived into that type of politics yet? Not really. So I think it's a conversation to have. At UBCM last year, I believe, that was a topic that UBCM had to vote on, and I believe it was voted down. And there's lots at the pro mic, but there's lots at the con mic. And everyone at the con mic was saying, I would not trust myself as a 16-year-old voting. So I'm sure Gavin probably has a very different perspective on that one, but that's just my view on that one.
You know, I actually agree with you. I'm not totally sure that is the solution to the challenge ahead of us. I think it's a conversation that's worth having. I think it's worth looking at, and I think we need to encourage civic engagement and voting from a young age. But to be really, really honest, what I think about is, you know, political engagement sort of comes in this series of sacraments where usually people sort of start paying attention as things happen in their life, right? You know, you get a paycheck and you notice there's some money that's not on it. And you start going, oh, where'd that go? And you start paying attention, right? You move into a community and you move out from home, or eventually you You might purchase a home or settle in a long-term rental. You become a parent, you become engaged in the community. These are all sort of sacraments that pull you further and further into engagement with politics. I think we do need to kind of figure out what the right place and time is in that regard. I actually, through the Forum for Millennial Leadership, have done virtually nothing around voting. I'm much more focused on how do we create, another Robert Filmer in a bunch of other jurisdictions? How do we make sure that there is an appropriate level of representation? Because the fact of the matter is, I don't want to float every elected official over 50 on an iceberg out to sea. That's not really the objective that me or anybody else who thinks like me is focused on. It really more comes down to how do we make sure that there's an appropriate balance of representation? How do we make sure that when you have a city council or a legislature that is dealing with this challenge of, hey, we've got a housing affordability crisis. Well, at the table should not just be my grandchild says X, or I heard from my daughter that Y. There should be people at the table who have direct representation in terms of what's happening for their generation, who either can speak to their experience or who frankly can access on a day-to-day basis a different network of stakeholders and get a different perspective, because that's what we need in our decision-making bodies, is diversity of perspective and the ability to really bring those things together to find balanced solutions. So I'm really much more focused on how we make sure that we have high quality, highly engaged, younger elected officials at all levels of government, and frankly, from all different political perspectives and persuasions.
I know I have young kids, and so I have an elementary and a middle school, and it's very fascinating in my district anyway. The kids actually go through a district-wide understanding. The candidates come and speak, who's going in our riding, like we've just had our election here. Then they actually have a vote day, and they tally them up between the district to let the kids know who they would have voted for. So, I certainly didn't have that as a child, but it's quite interesting to start engaging at a really young age. So they're really familiar with the process, at least the voting side, and what the candidates are saying, and so that's quite interesting.
I think that's an excellent idea. I think all schools should do that.
Yeah, I was really thrilled by it, and I know as a woman and being involved in politics, feels like a different lifetime ago. At the back end side, I was able to go to, I was sponsored to get to go to an Equal Voice, and that was 3 days of all parties of women and all levels of government. And they brought in young girls that may be considered, go into politics at at any time. Usually it takes quite a long time for women to decide to go into politics. So I'm wondering, Gavin, do you know of any other organizations? Like, I know you guys, I don't know, you say you support politicians, youth that are going to politics. Do you do that at a wide spread, or is there other organizations that we can tap in our youth to sort of get themselves to see themselves in those political roles?
Yeah, I'm not the best to speak to the tools that are available to women, but certainly there are great.
Oh, to youth in general. I'm just saying that, yeah. I know that there's some women specific ones.
Yeah, so obviously Women's Campaign School, fantastic. Equal Voice. We're a small incipient organization, and what we've tried to do primarily in the Lower Mainland so far is just to go out and identify high potential, young potential elected officials municipally. I'll be frank, my objective is to create a pipeline of Robert Filmers so that you have, Dylan Kruger's another person I know very well in Delta, excellent young city councilor, very smart, adds a lot of perspective. My view of things is that if we can make sure there's at least one young person on each, city council, frankly, then when the provincial and federal parties come calling, they're not just talking about 30-year-olds or 35-year-olds, they're talking about 30-year-olds who are 2 or 3 term city councilors or mayors. And if we do that, we build that capacity. So I think in part it is about kind of formally training people. That is something we do, but it's also about recognizing what succession looks like. If we are effective as a whole, then what happens is we end up with people that are running for school boards or are running for city councils and are then getting experience on those city councils and are then able to ladder up to higher levels of government and to enter not only as young people, but also as people who are experienced in governance and who hopefully also have, in parallel to that, experience outside of government. So I don't think it's as simple as just training people. I think it's really, as much as that, it's about frankly, every elected official thinking of it as their obligation to replace themselves.
Right. Sort of like Councillor Film, are you saying, like, your thought process is, do I put another youth in this seat?
Yeah, absolutely. And, is politics a career? Should you be saying, oh, I'm going to sit in public office from the age of 18 to 65? No, public office should not be a career. So you do have to look at that succession of who can fill my seat when I'm done, whether that's 1 term, 2 terms, 3 terms, whether that means I'm going to move on to a different set of public office, who's going to fill my, that office. Having that succession plan, I feel, is really important. It also, it has that mentorship, but also, you can coach someone. So, and that's good. If you have someone that looks to you as the mentor, but you're also coaching them, it's a two-way street. And being able to work that person, if successful, will be a really positive thing.
Okay, we've got a question here around voter turnout. We have low voter turnout, and how do you, and more so with the youth, so how do we encourage the youth to engage if we have the challenge of getting them to vote?
Can I question the question? I apologize for going again so soon, but we do have low voter turnout, but all data that I have looked at actually shows 2 things. Firstly, what we're actually seeing is conversion to the mean, or reversion to the mean, in terms of voter turnout. So young voters at multiple levels of government are actually increasing their overall turnout relative to older voters who do still vote more and more consistently. But you are seeing, on the one hand, higher turnout happening among the younger generations. And on the other hand, what is happening is that about 2 years ago, millennials actually eclipsed baby boomers as the largest cohort of potential voters. So every trend suggests that, in fact, it is incorrect. Many amateur political strategists often like to say, don't worry, the young people don't vote. They're wrong. And in fact, you need only look at the results of the provincial election that just happened to be shown with certainty that if you do not do enough to engage young people, if you do not do enough to engage young parents, suburban women, take them seriously, run candidates who look like them, quite honestly, you're going to reap the whirlwind in terms of the political consequences. To throw a data point out there, and at the risk of being political, and I'll freely disclose that I'm a BC Liberal, the BC Liberal Party ran 10 candidates under 40. 9 were male, and 1 was elected. And in fact, only 2 were running in ridings that, no matter the realistic outcome of this election, only 2 actually had a shot at getting elected. So quite honestly, as someone who's 36 years old, living in Vancouver, I looked at that and I said, this party doesn't take me seriously. So, the same goes in terms of the way that municipal elections go, provincial, federal. It's really, really important that you take young folks seriously, because it's actually starting to become less and less true that they don't turn out and that they don't wield influence. They are, in fact, the incremental swing vote that makes up the difference between losing and winning in many elections.
Yeah, and I mean, when you talk about voter turnout as well, I mean, I can guarantee in Qualicum Beach, it wasn't the young people that elected me into office, because, there's a lot more older than young. But, when I look at who votes and who doesn't vote, I don't have to push my friends to vote, but I have to push my parents to vote, right? And that's that age where, and, a lot of times you hear the young people say, well, my voice doesn't matter, why do I have to vote? And you don't really hear that nowadays. You heard that, probably 5-6 years ago when the young people, but nowadays you don't hear that. I think all of my friends will get out and vote, and they're all voting amongst different parties, different candidates at their city councils. But I mean, at this last provincial election, I didn't have to text my 18-year-old sisters, did you vote? I had to text my parents, did you vote? And then the answer was, oh, no, not yet. I said, well, you better get out and vote. You got 1 more day. So, it's that conversation, but I think Gavin's right of, it's that older generation that's not in voting demographic as it is much younger.
Yeah, I think talking about issues that matter to young people and the younger population under 29 or under 30, right? Increasing taxes or decreasing taxes, while that resonated, really on the ground, we're just trying to get a full-time, part-time job at minimum wage to make ends meet. Like taxes are an issue, but I wouldn't say it's a big issue. I'd say employment for young people, access to employment, equitable access to the economy with education. How am I going to get educated so I can be selected to work at this firm or something like that? How can I compete in a professional setting as opposed to maybe an entry-level position, for example, at McDonald's, which is where I started at, a fundamental position in my life that helped me gain some skills. So I think talking about issues that matter to young people and elders and the middle class and the babies and the generations yet unborn, I think that's very critical. And we could really see that in the election, the first election debate between the party leader, the three party leaders there, what the narrative was. And I think when I'm looking at that, why didn't they talk about jobs? Why didn't they talk about education or, the minimum wage more, how to support a young family like myself? I have a 15-month-old son. How do we talk about racism, what we experience in secondary school and what we experience in post-secondary school? Things like that matter in a society that's changing. Like BC really relied on the baby boomers to carry the backbone of our society to where our economy is now. And then we're passing the baton to the millennials and then to the next generation. So we all have to work together and ensure all those perspectives are included in the political setting, especially when they're making decisions for us. And that's why it's so important that young people, that the parties and the Legislative Assembly in Ottawa and the Parliament, or in Victoria and Parliament in Ottawa, is reflective of society. It's very important because sometimes they could be out of tune with where a society is, because that's been the platform for years upon years upon years and decades. So I think talking about the issues that matter to young people will get them out to vote.
Can you, to the panelists, or do our social media, is that one of the reasons you get the younger people out to vote? That's what I find anyway, even though I'm a little older.
I think, social media, frankly, reaches everyone nowadays. It's changing the way that people are engaging around politics, and it's changing the way that people are consuming content. But if I may, I want to actually briefly circle back to this issue around young people in municipal politics with some data. We actually commissioned polling during the 2018 municipal election throughout BC, and we really wanted to understand what is the differential in generational engagement by levels of government. And what I mean by that is, are people more or less likely to be engaged in provincial, federal, municipal politics? And if you look at provincial and federal politics, what you see is this fairly consistent pattern where 18 to 34-year-olds and 35 to 55-year-olds become more engaged as they get older, and there's a pretty big gap where those 18 to 34-year-olds are significantly less engaged. What happened in 2018 or leading into 2018 is that the level of interest among 18 to 34-year-olds in municipal politics, the idea that it had a direct impact on their day-to-day lives, absolutely skyrocketed. And that, I believe, was largely a function of housing affordability and transportation issues. But I think that everyone, we've largely been talking, with municipal politicians and about municipal politics. The reality is that younger cohort really seems to have tuned in to the impact that municipal government has on their day-to-day lives. I don't think housing affordability has gotten any better in the last couple of years. So I think that you should realistically and reasonably expect that you're going to see a very significant level of engagement and a significant level of attentiveness from younger voters to municipal politics. And I think that's going to be very, very important in 2022.
And I think that's an important piece too, because when you look at the three levels of government, I saw a lot of people ask, are you going to move on to a higher level of government? And my answer is no, because when you start moving on to higher levels of government, I always see you're losing touch with the people, and you see that nowadays. When you're at the local government, we had a council meeting last night, 3 hours long, and every decision that we made last night affects every single resident in my town. all 10,000 people, every decision I made last night, in one way or another, it's going to affect them, from the sewer rates we approved, to the development permits we approved, to the Christmas events that we approved. Everything that we deal with affects the daily lives of every resident, no matter the age, even whether you vote for us or not, if you're not old enough. So that's I think the special piece about local government and municipal politics is you get to see the exact change that you've done over your term, and it is quite a special and fun thing to participate in.
So just as we're ending, I love to quick 1-minute answers as to what brings you hope for the next generation of leadership. Councillor Joseph or Robert, Councillor Fillmore?
That's what brings me hope. I think, one thing is seeing the engagement. Before all of this was, before COVID and everything was going on, I would make an appearance in schools, or, tour around, and, especially in the high schools where people know who you are. And not that I'm trying to, but, it's having a younger person sitting on, let's say, your city council, other young people go, hey, that could be me. Our committees, when we have vacancies on our committees, we have high school students applying to sit on our committees. And that gives me hope, because that means, first of all, I don't have to be here for the rest of my life. But also, it shows that young people are ready to step up and take over. Because I'm not going to be young. By the time I turn 24, there's going to be a 20-year-old, and that means I'm no longer young to that person. So, it's, that gives me hope that there's young people that are looking at running. When I looked at this provincial election that just happened, you look at how many young people the Greens had going for them. That gives me hope that there's a lot of young people that are interested also in that level of politics. So I do think we're in very good hands moving forward.
Councillor Joseph?
I think what gives me hope is that the conversations like today that we're having, I can't think of, in my early years all the way up to 30, how many conversations we've had about this, and just, having the ability to talk about it, and space being opened up at those decision-making tables for me to sit at, and to be with all you fine folks here today, and listen to, be able to be part of your company and share our perspectives, and that we can work together to continue to open up these crevices and allow the opportunity to flow through, and so those mentorships can continue. I think that's really what gives me hope, because I'm sitting here today, and there is a number of young people behind me, younger than me, 24 or 34 and under. I wish I was still 24, but 34 and younger, that are waiting at the opportunity to just open. I think that I was in that position in my early 20s, where I was just, really hungry and thirsty to get that mentorship, to get that opportunity. And once it was opened up, here I am today. So that gives me hope that there's a lot of other young people walking with us to sit with people in this round table and in the chairs that make decisions and influence decisions, to have that one opportunity or many opportunities. So that's what really gives me hope, and I know that we can walk together in harmoniously in our path forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both our councillors. Gavin, 30 seconds.
All right, what gives me hope is, firstly, I got a 2-year-old daughter. I have to have hope. Secondly, I have hope because I'm here with these elected officials on this panel, and I'm here with lots of great people who may be a little older, but are clearly engaged in this conversation. And thirdly, brass tacks, we just went through a provincial election that was creative destruction. I believe that creativity will follow the destruction, and with that, a really serious conversation about how we make sure that every generation and every group is included in our provincial politics. That's the benefit of everybody, of every political orientation in this province, and I believe we've just triggered a really serious conversation about renewal in our province across the political spectrum, and that's healthy, and that's good, and it gives me hope.
Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you, audience. Thanks for engaging and for staying those extra few minutes for this really interesting and thought-provoking conversation. Thanks to Fortis BC, for sponsoring it, and to VIEA for always holding these conversations for us. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you all.